Of all the works of internet horror that have ever been written, Jeff the Killer is one of them. A bizarre, poorly written, kind of cringy, not even remotely scary story written almost certainly by a child, something that would have been forgotten almost immediately. But there was a scary picture at the end of it, so it cemented itself as an icon of the creepypasta community. And that picture is pretty haunting. I was actively scared of it from the time that I saw it when I was like 11 until a couple of months ago when I got over that fear. So a 15-year reign of terror is pretty impressive, but the fear of that image kind of incepted my mind into believing the original story was actually scary. It's kind of like if you walked through a haunted house that was very underwhelming, but at the very end you were greeted by a police officer who told you that your spouse had died in a car crash. Now obviously that would be a pretty terrifying experience, but I don't think the haunted house could claim any of the terror as their own doing, if that makes any sense. Still, Jeff the Killer's continued popularity is really intriguing to me because it seems to be fueled entirely by a single image and nostalgia. And from that popularity spawned a whole bunch of Jeff the Killer sequel stories. The one that I'm going to be reading and talking about today is called Jeff is Back. That title is already kind of funny to me because there's absolutely nothing even remotely scary about it. Jeff is back is just a normal thing that any friend of Jeff would say. And assuming the Jeff that you were addressing in that sentence didn't have the last name of the killer, then Jeff being back probably wouldn't be that big of an issue, but I digress. Let's get into the actual story now. The following story was written by a detective whom, after analyzing video evidence, witness accounts, and the video claimed to have been watched, developed a story. This is that story. Okay, so starting out, we get what is maybe the most confusing intro to a story that I have ever read. What does any of this mean? Typically, I would roast any story for beginning in a way that just like explains what we are about to read, but this doesn't even really do that because it just makes everything harder to understand. The following story was written by a detective who is part of the investigation of Jeff the Killer. This is that story would maybe be a little bit better. It still doesn't solve the issue of the redundancy of being told the following story immediately followed up with this is that story. The intro actually says story 3 separate times, and I kind of just wonder if what we're about to read is going to be a story. It was late at night on a typical Tuesday evening. I was surfing the internet as I had 2 large coffees from my local coffee shop earlier that day and was unable to sleep. You know, the classic typical Tuesday in which you drink 2 large coffees directly before bed? It happens to the best of us. After watching pointless YouTube video after YouTube video, I came across a strange title in the related videos bar. This guy was binging my content? That's awesome, thanks for the shout out. None of the characters were of the English language. However, the shapes of the characters seemed to resemble words, although I couldn't quite decipher them. Curious, I clicked on the video. I suddenly began to hear various creaks and groans coming from my house. I rolled around and grabbed a nearby baseball bat, ready for a fatal battle. I heard some sounds in my house, so I grabbed a baseball bat and immediately prepared to kill or be killed. Something tells me that fatal probably wasn't the best word to use here. Also, and I know I've mentioned this before, but I live in a very old building and it creaks like crazy at night. And I used to hear that creaking and groaning and be prepared to engage in a fatal battle, but now I just kind of ignore it for the most part. And it's getting to the point where someone could probably actually break into my place and I wouldn't even notice because I would just assume it was the typical creaking. To my surprise, there were no intruders in the house, nor any signs of a forced entry. All the doors were also locked. Figuring I was just going crazy, I shrugged my shoulders and lazily walked back into my room. I had spent a lot of money on a high bandwidth connection, so I was perplexed that the video I had clicked on had not loaded yet. I impatiently clicked the video 4 more times in an attempt to bring it up. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the page finally loaded. The true horror of this story is the amount of money our character is paying for a lackluster connection at best. How is he going to play Halo 3 with the boys? The background was black and it completely hid all of the text, except for the username of the uploader and the description, both in crimson red. I have never known crimson to be any color other than red, but please, go on. The username of the uploader was Nightmare Slumber, and the description read as such. How ignorant of you. You are unaware of my demonic presence in your life. I will destroy everything you stand for. Worthless coward, I am always watching you, and soon you will come to live with me. Forever. Jeff the Killer really seems to have upped his poetry game since the last time we read a story about him, and that's what I call character growth. I will say that if this story is taking place around the same time as the original story, then that would mean Jeff the Killer is like 14 years old at this point. And honestly, this video description sounds exactly like something an edgy 14-year-old would write, so I applaud the author for the accuracy in the writing here. But I also find it strange that there seems to be something paranormal going on with Jeff. I mean, The house started creaking when the narrator clicked on this spooky Jeff the Killer video. As far as I know, Jeff the Killer is just a normal kid whose face was horrifically disfigured by a couple of 1940s New York mobster children and a thing of bleach. So I don't get why he has these supernatural abilities all of a sudden. I think someone told me in a comment that he gets his magical powers from Slender Man. And I mean, I liked Creepypasta a lot when I was in middle and high school. I still really like Creepypasta, but I never really got into the whole like strange House of Mouse style crossover canon. It just never appealed to me. But maybe that's where all of this supernatural stuff comes from, and I'm just not as in tune with the Jeff the Killer fandom as I really should be by now. Figuring this was simply the idiocy of a 12-year-old, I did not heed the danger I was in. Hey, Jeff the Killer is probably like 14, so it's a little insulting to call him a 12-year-old. But also, I am going to cut you some slack and say that not heeding the warning of a YouTube video description is a pretty normal thing to do. If Jeff the Killer was going to Jeff the Kill you, then Jeff would probably have Jeff the Killed you by now. The video began with a picture of an abandoned mental asylum, later found out to be Denbigh Asylum. Sorry for all my Welsh viewers out there, I do not know how to pronounce Denbigh or Denbigh, however you say it. The picture was a long, dark, and tattered corridor extending past the viewer's visual field. The left wall of the corridor had windows separated by columns. The corridor was bathed in an eerie moonlight, only broken by the shadows of the columns. The darkness of the corridor was a pure black, the likes of which I had never seen. I got the vibe that the asylum was hastily abandoned and never cleaned up. There's a weird inconsistency in the writing here where the voice of the narration changes from expressive to casual on a dime. That's a common issue in kind of this amateur or beginner writing. We get the corridor was bathed in an eerie moonlight, and pretty soon afterwards we get I got the vibe that the asylum, which sounds significantly less formal than what came before. It's not that big of an issue. Like I said, it's a really easy mistake to make, but if you're starting out wanting to write something, you should pay attention to kind of the voice of your characters sounding internally consistent with each other. For the first minute of the video, it was simply a still frame of the corridor. There was no sound nor movement. At approximately 1 minute and 13 seconds of the video, I noticed a slow but definite movement at the very end of the corridor. The had a human stance, but walked very unusually, most notably with its head pointed straight at the ground. Maybe this is supposed to be scary, but I'm literally just picturing this entity walking the way that George Michael does in Arrested Development when the Charlie Brown music plays. The creature accelerated steadily as the video progressed, eventually breaking into a full run. The creature ran headfirst into the camera, knocking it over. Simultaneously, I heard a very loud bang at the door. There was only one, and it sounded like someone had just run into the door. Oh man, it does look like there's some supernatural going-ons here. Either that or this video is actually a live stream, and our narrator just lives at the end of this abandoned asylum hallway. That would actually be kind of a cool twist if you found out that he was like a patient at this abandoned asylum for some reason, or his apartment was just improperly zoned, so that's why he lives next to the asylum. Or maybe Jeff the Killer is just going to be magic in this story, and then the video could transport our narrator into this asylum. Like, imagine he opens his front door and he finds that it leads out into a spooky hallway where Jeff the Killer is like hanging out, head pointed directly at the ground, running directly into the camera. That would actually be kind of interesting. I jumped up and grabbed the bat again when I heard my computer make an error sound. The computer then blue screened at that point, saying it shut down for safety reasons. The screen then proceeded to make note of the fact that an unknown hacker had been obtaining information about my whereabouts. What kind of software does this man have that his computer is telling him that he is being remotely hacked by someone trying to obtain his information? I mean, I got messages like that popped up all the time back in the day when I was on addictinggames.com, but I'm pretty sure they were all scams. I also love the mental image of Jeff the Killer like sitting in the corner of a room with a laptop trying to trace the IP address of everyone who watches his YouTube video. I probably should have been honest about this before, but I actually do the exact same thing to all of you guys, so it's not that strange. So if you hear a strange noise at night, then it's probably just Davis the Killer coming to Davis to kill you, so sorry about that. My antivirus program ran a trace of the hacker's IP address and came back with a city in northern Wales. Specifically, the hack had been made from an abandoned mental asylum. Abandoned mental asylum with functioning internet? Sounds about right. Then the power went out. At this point, I became extremely intimidated. My eyes welled up with water as my breathing accelerated. Kind of strange to specify that your eyes welled up with water and not saying my eyes welled up with tears, so that maybe that sounds like too scared or fearful, but that's obviously what they're going for, so I don't know why they chose to use the word water. I began to hear someone groaning in pain outside the door. I knew it was a mistake to go look, but I decided to anyway. When I glanced through the peephole, there was nobody outside the door. I could still hear the groaning though. No way in hell was I opening that door. Groaning in pain is such a funny detail because now I'm just picturing that someone ran headfirst into the narrator's door and is like on the floor writhing around in agony. Like, imagine that's why he can't see him in the peephole. Jeff the Killer is just lying on the ground like holding his face. He's like, I really shouldn't have ran headfirst from the door. This really hurts. My face is Jeff the killing me right now. I flew into a panic attack and immediately attempted to contact police, However, I simply got a busy tone on both the landline and my cell phone. Isn't this story supposed to have been written by a detective, so isn't he the police? At the very least, he should have a gun on him. Both this story and Happy Appy follow that same trope of the main character being the world's most incompetent detective who seemingly forgets that he has connections to the police. Also, you know this story was written in the 2000s when our main character still has both a cell phone and a landline. I ran back up to my computer to see if I could hook it up to a generator and ask for help that way, when I noticed that the computer screen was still on. In giant red text upon a black screen it read, "Go to sleep." Such a strange, iconic killer catchphrase. I get that it's supposed to be scary, but I never really understood why that became his slogan. Like, you'd think that Jeff would have been told that phrase beforehand, or maybe it might have been like an innocuous saying that somebody had, or maybe he had, but it just kind of comes out of nowhere. There isn't anything inherently terrifying about the phrase "go to sleep," and I can't bring myself to be afraid of it. It didn't even scare me back when I was in middle school. And honestly, that's saying something because I was afraid of so much when I was a kid. I remember thinking the girl from The Ring was actually like the scariest thing that had ever been created ever. I actually watched The Ring for the first time, and then like immediately my family did like a family camping trip in these like weird tiny little cabins literally in Washington state where I live, and it was the most ring-coded thing I've ever done in my entire life. And like I said, it was a family reunion camp out, so Samara Morgan, the girl from The Ring, very well could have been related to me, and I was on edge the entire time. A piercing scream then rang out. It sounded like someone was dying. I raced to the kitchen and drew 2 knives out of a drawer. This was real. This was actually happening. The screams got louder and more desperate. Under the screams, I began to hear a faint but distinct hysterical laughter. It's not clear where these screams are coming from. Also, I forgot to mention it earlier, but the power went out and this guy's computer was still on, and that's really, really scary. But back to the screams, I like to imagine they're coming from the computer and our detective is grabbing the knives to defend himself from Jeff in case he crawls out of the computer like The Ring. The scariest movie of all time. I ran about the house trying to figure out what was going on. This made me laugh because I'm just picturing him like sprinting around the house with his arms flailing in the air in panic. Also, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to a costume party directly after recording this. That's not a joke, I'm really doing that, which is why I'm dressed like an astronaut. Then I heard a sobbing coming from a closet near my computer room. My skin ran cold as I grasped the doorknob. It was cold to the touch. Yeah, most doorknobs are cold to the touch. It would be strange if it wasn't cold to the touch. I should have said something before opening the door, but I didn't have the common sense to do so. What do you mean you should have had the common sense to say something? It's a closet in your house that you live in by yourself. Why would you expect to find someone in there? I also love that our narrator is like getting down on himself for not having common sense while being stalked by a paranormal serial killer that knocked his power out while somehow keeping his computer still fully powered. I whipped the door open to see a young girl, dead and bloody, crumpled in a heap in my closet. Her stomach had been ripped open and her entrails pulled out. She was entirely naked and coated completely in blood. Yep, we're reading a creepypasta. We have a violent death with exposed entrails and everything. The wall was suddenly illuminated with a red light. I noticed that something was written in blood on the wall. You should have heeded the warning. Time to go to sleep. The quickest way to make your serial killer antagonist not scary is to have him unironically use the word heated. Why is he writing his spooky messages so formally? I whirled around and saw the figure in the video, head down and everything. I froze in fear. With one sudden movement, almost as if I was watching a video that had skipped a few frames, the figure twisted its head and looked at me. Then everything went back. Everything went black, not back. Get it together, Recording Davis. Okay, I was making jokes earlier about The Ring, but now that I'm recording this, that is like literally exactly what happens in The Ring, where like Samara stands with her head down and she literally like skips forward like she's skipping frames in a movie. So like maybe some Jeff the Killer plagiarism accusations going on right now. But this finishes off what I think is supposed to be the first section of the story because the next paragraph starts with detective notes. So I think we've like switched perspectives at this point. Overall, this introduction is mostly just confusing and it better answers some questions later on like who was the dead girl in the closet, and why is Jeff constantly keeping his head down? Roughest Drafts talked about this in his most recent video about the rake, but just throwing in a dead child or a dead body in order to up the scare factor is just kind of lazy writing. Death in horror is really fascinating because it's something that we see literally all over the place in the genre, but it's used to different effects depending on the story. There are certain stories that are absolutely filled with violent deaths in a way that doesn't feel gratuitous. I think Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart is a really great example of that. But that story uses those deaths as a way to explore morality and violence and interesting characters rather than just like throwing some gore in there to freak the reader out. Obviously, if you found a dead girl in your closet that had been mutilated, it would be terrifying, but the quality of the writing in this story hasn't done anything to put me in the place of our narrator. I like to think I'm pretty good at inserting myself into stories, but I'm just unable to do that here. Maybe that's just me though, so let me know if you're freaked out by this story so far. Detectives note, the victim's body was found in a similar state to that of the young girl in the closet. Despite numerous blood tests, we could not identify the girl. Okay, so now we have a different girl or different body than the one that was found in the closet that we're talking about now. The story is like weirdly hard to follow, but not in a way that feels intentional. I suppose it could be talking about like the protagonist of the first part of the story, who I thought was a detective, so it's weird that we're going into another detective, but I can't follow any of this at this point. It's even harder to follow because I'm in this Coast Guard approved dry suit that's like 1,000,000 degrees. Also, I don't think that you'd be able to identify a body by doing numerous blood tests. Typically, you identify a body by having someone related to the deceased identify them. I mean, I guess you could identify a body through blood if you already had that person's DNA in the system, but that's typically not like the go-to method used by detectives. In fact, due to the lack of a missing persons report, the fact that no one came forward to claim her remains or try to solve the case of the murder, and because no blood tests match anyone we tested, it seemed like the girl never really existed. I know this probably wasn't the intent, but the phrase, and because no blood tests matched anyone we tested, makes it seem like the police are like randomly testing strangers to see if they match the blood of the dead girl. And I'm just thinking of the kind of fever dream logic you'd need to test a living person to see if they are the dead body that you are trying to identify. We have confirmed that the hacking came from the abandoned mental hospital. However, there was no explanation as to how this was timed so close together. Why is Jeff the Killer just hanging out in Wales? That implies that he managed to get from the US to Wales without being identified. And like maybe some serial killers would be able to do that, but Jeff isn't known for having the most innocuous face. It's kind of his whole thing. We have issued an arrest warrant, but no officer wants to enter the ruins in fear of his or her life. I don't mean to tell anyone how to do their job because I have the most like nothing job there is. But I kind of feel like that's what you signed up for when you became a police officer. Not entering a building because there's a criminal inside of it seems like it would defeat the point of having a police force in the first place. Also, if Jeff the Killer is hiding out in Wales, then why is it written like the detective is still on this case? Shouldn't it be like transferred to the Welsh police or something? I don't know the laws of international police jurisdictions, so if you're like an international cop, then let me know in the comments down below. The only break we got was a witness sighting of an extremely unusual and frightening creature running into the hospital a few days later. From the witness's testimony, we noticed a shocking similarity between the face of the deranged mental hospital inhabitant and the following image, taken from a site filled with horror stories with the words "Go to sleep" captioned above it. Wait, are you telling me that in this universe, Jeff the Killer was a creepypasta, but there also just happens to be a real Jeff the Killer? It's like the story is trying to confuse the reader as much as humanly possible. I also love the idea of the police using creepypasta.com as a source for their criminal investigations. You probably won't be able to make it past the insane amount of banner ads on there, so good luck. Numerous murders like this have occurred since, and every single one of the victims has been noted to watch the video a few times before the homicide is committed. I hope you're noticing just how scattered the plot of the story is. We jump back and forth between the murder victims and the hunt for Jeff the Killer with like no rhyme or reason. I do kind of like the idea that if you watch this video, then you get killed. It's very similar to something like The Ring, which I know I've mentioned way too many times right now, and I sound like Greg Turkington. So it's not really like an original idea, but I've always kind of liked that concept. It would be a lot better if the person who wrote this actually made a video to go along with it. I think that's the only way the story could end up being kind of scary. I personally just love any sort of multimedia horror project. It's always impressive to me coming from someone who cannot create any sort of visual art for the life of me. YouTube officials have tried to remove the video. However, every moderator that tries ends up getting brutally murdered. The case is still unsolved. I wish this video was still around now that YouTube is using their advanced AI algorithm to remove videos, because I wouldn't mind if that were brutally murdered. In retribution for that comment, I'm sure the YouTube AI algorithm will brutally Jeff the Kill this video. Detectives Note 2. After further researching the case, a few discoveries have been made. First, while I have been unable to find the source of the video, last-minute accounts of the killer's victims have provided enough descriptive evidence to point to the image used as the background for the video. Jeff really has to step up his murdering game if so many of his victims are able to give detailed descriptions of the video after they've been killed by him. I mean, come on, man, your name is Jeff the Killer, not Jeff bring you to the brink of death but not all the wayer. Although this is a JPEG image, and thus by nature is a still image, rumor has it that if you stare into the picture long enough, the image begins to twist and contort. Continue staring and you can see a creature beginning to run towards the camera. No one has watched the image long enough to see the creature come close. Man, if only there was some sort of like detective on the case whose job it is to analyze evidence. Too bad nobody seems interested in doing that. It also feels like the story is kind of backtracking because we've already seen the consequences of staring at the picture with the first account from the detective. So why are we being teased with the idea that something bad might happen if you look at it? We know what happens, and this all just feels kind of unnecessary. But enough visual evidence is there to assume that it is the same person seen in the video. The image can be found below. View at your own risk, for your life may be at stake. This is followed by what looks like a stock image that shows up if you search creepy building. I've stared at this thing for a while and I haven't yet seen Jeffrey. In addition, I have been searching for more information regarding the killer. To my horror, I have found a set of stories online regarding one Jeff the Killer. The stories dictate a serial killer who develops his psychopathic tendencies at the onset of his teenage years, eventually killing everybody in his immediate family. Well, obviously you haven't done your research that well, because in the sequel story, Homicidal Lou, we find out that Jeff didn't actually kill his brother. Also, I like how the detective says that Jeff develops psychopathic tendencies at the onset of his teenage years, but completely fails to mention the horrific mangling of his face. I mean, I know that Jeff was feeling a feeling before he got his face all messed up, but I'd wager that the burning of his face with bleach and tequila was a contributing factor to his eventual psychopathy. The most shocking aspect of the story is that Jeff killed his victims in the same brutal way as seen with a Denbei asylum killer, even going to the extent of both killers communicating go to sleep before murdering their victims. The most frightening aspect, however, is that the image provided by Jeff the Killer is the exact same as the image provided by witnesses for the Denbei asylum killer, leading investigators to believe that they are in fact the same person. For further reading, simply search Jeff the Killer online and read at your own risk. I can't imagine stumbling onto this story organically without knowing anything about Jeff the Killer and being both intrigued and terrified about who he is. So then you look him up and you read his origin story where a bunch of like 8th grade bullies that talk like Italian mobsters show up with guns at a child's birthday party. Like, imagine you first hear about Ted Bundy and you have a morbid curiosity about the crimes that he committed. But the first story that you read about him isn't like an actually professionally produced article or like even like a Wikipedia page, but an AO3 Ted Bundy fanfiction where he teams up with Sonic the Hedgehog. I guess depending on the quality of that fanfiction, you might end up being more scared of Ted Bundy than you would have been if you just like read about his real life crimes. The most terrifying fact of all, though, lies in my personal experience. After writing this report, I heard strange sounds throughout my home. Wait, after writing this report, like the one that we are currently reading, the one that you are currently writing? Is this guy seeing the future now? Figuring it was nothing, I continued doing research on Jeff. The banging noises got louder and louder. I searched outside, thinking maybe a bird was injured. I would love to know the thought process behind hearing banging directly outside your house that gets louder and louder and more aggressive and thinking, wait, maybe a bird was injured. Are injured birds known for being loud? My first thought was that maybe he was saying that like a bird flew into the side of his house or something, but that would only be one bang and not like consistent banging getting louder and louder. As I stepped to my door, however, I noticed movement in the window. I immediately attempted to phone police, but got a busy signal. This is actually just reading like a repeat of what happened at the beginning of the story, but I think we are maybe supposed to be following a second detective at this point. Either way, it still feels strange that you would call the police since you are a member of the police, but I guess why wouldn't you call the police? Concerned, I put the phone down and looked towards the door, only to see Jeff staring directly at me with those cold, dead eyes and that horrific, disfigured face. His smile was the most eerie thing I have ever seen. I immediately pulled out my gun and began shooting. Jeff took off into the night. Cue the Danny DeVito, Frank Reynolds, so anyways, I started blasting meme. Jeff's also doing that annoying like movie killer thing where instead of just killing the detective, he is like messing with him and running off into the night. It's quite frustrating. I mean, just Jeff to kill him already. That's literally your name. I know I am in danger, so I've set up constant surveillance around my home to protect myself. We're running into the classic creepypasta dilemma where we're supposed to believe that this man is like currently being stalked by Jeff, but he also has time to write this story. If I ever think that someone is like inside my home, or if I ever feel like I'm in danger, I tend to freeze up and get very quiet, just start like intently listening to every little noise. And I know that's not everybody's response to something scary. I'm sure you guys have all heard the classic fear response before. Flight, fight, freeze, or write a scary story for an online forum. I still see bright flashes of light and hear banging noises around my home, along with the rare but still horrifying laughter of which only a true psychotic serial killer can provide. Are we sure those banging noises and laughter aren't just coming from an injured bird that just heard the best joke of its bird life? I don't know how much longer it will be until we catch him, but if he keeps making these mistakes, then we'll have a solid identity and an airtight case. The classic airtight case of The serial killer was simply using a cursed YouTube video to violently kill unsuspecting moderators. I'm sure that will go over just fine in a trial. I feel we are on the brink of taking him in, for I keep hearing laughter and banging sounds that are escalating in volume, and I also am seeing an odd orb of light in the distance. By the way, I have no idea what this odd orb of light is at all. It's probably related to like the Slenderman, Jeff the Killer mythos that I don't know about, but that is such a weird detail. I mean, it could just be daytime and the guy's talking about the sun, which is an odd orb of light, I guess. I have radioed fellow police to the scene, but the radio has gone dead. The light is getting closer, and I have my gun ready. It's him. I can see his face. Time to... blah! Keyboard smash noises, I assume, is what that's trying to communicate. There are a lot of found footage movies that end with the person filming the footage dying or like the camera being destroyed. It's a pretty common trope in that genre. And I think that even though it's pretty cliche by now, it works well. It's a good way to explain why the footage ends when it ends. But seeing someone try to recreate this in written form is so funny to me. I imagine Jeff the Killer kills him by like smashing him into his keyboard because that's the only way this would happen. Like if Jeff snuck up on him, then I imagine there would be some sort of scuffle, but I have to think the detective would like get up from his computer. Maybe not though. But it's also wild that he is literally like staring Jeff in the face, and instead of shooting him or running away, he commits himself to writing this account and telling us what he is doing moment by moment. The thing is, I don't think it's impossible to end a written story in this way. You just have to do it a bit differently. Ted the Caver ends in a similar kind of way with the author going silent. But it's set up in that story that he is going back to the spooky cave and will update everybody the next day. So when we see that there's not another entry, we know that something bad happened to him. I mean, either that or he just forgot the password to his website, which I guess was also a possibility. But this story feels like it's going for something similar, but doesn't know how to really stick the landing. I get the sense that the author was maybe envisioning this as like a movie more than anything. I know that I personally struggle with this as well. I have some ideas for stories that I want to tell, and I'm working on like an internet horror story right now, but I always envision it as like a movie or a miniseries or a short film first. The issue is I can't really make those things on my own, and they take a lot more effort, so I never really follow through on those ideas. I just need to get better at like writing short stories based on them instead. So I understand that the author is wanting to essentially have an action-packed ending with a final jump scare, but the execution just isn't there in its current state. And I think this is something that is learned by just like reading a whole lot more. When you read more, you understand how to have an action-packed conclusion in a written format. I've talked about this a lot before, but I just barely got back into like reading consistently and reading novels again, like maybe a year and a half ago or like a year ago. And it took time to get used to like, you know, how a story needs to be formatted differently versus like TV or movies, which I watch a lot of. And I think so many people have that same experience as myself when wanting to make something creative. It's like most of your creative ideas are informed by visual media that you've seen, and translating that into a written media is really difficult if you haven't just like read a whole ton. And I was going to end this video with me talking more about reading like I do like in half of these videos, but what if I told you that this story wasn't over yet? What if I told you that there's still a little bit left to go? Let's get into it. Hello everyone, my name is Jeff. That's right, Jeff the Killer writes the end of this story, Jeff himself. I take everything back, this story is amazing. I don't like that this story is being published, but oh well. It's not like any of you could catch a demon of my caliber. Why does Jeff the Killer talk like Shadow the Hedgehog? The detective is now dead, the journal is over, and it's quite hilarious because in viewing this document, I have logged every single one of your IP addresses and know exactly where you are. For example, one of you works at a cousin's on Drexel Boulevard. One of you lives in Burbank. One of you lives on East Avenue. One of you goes to university and has a roommate named Becky. One of you is going to Iowa. One of you goes to is quite the whiz at the piano. The list goes on and on. How does someone's IP address let Jeff know that they are quite the whiz at the piano? Do they live in like Pianoville, Alaska or something? But also, and this is the most important aspect of this story, none of this makes any sense at all. Jeff must have posted this story himself, which means that no one could have been reading it while he was writing it. That's not how the internet works. It would be like me saying right now that I know where you guys live because this video is tracking your location, but I'm recording this video and I wouldn't know any of that stuff until I posted it. I actually think the idea of Jeff hijacking the story and posting it himself could have been cool if there were like hints along the way that he had messed with the stuff beforehand. Like imagine the detective was like weirdly impressed with Jeff's murdering skills or something to a point that it feels strange, and then we get the reveal that like Jeff was editing the story the whole time. I mean, it wouldn't make the story scary, but it would be an interesting use of this strange direction the plot goes in at the last minute. I know where you work. I know your friends. Joke's on you, Jeff. I don't have any friends. Your family, your loved ones. I know everything. Soon, all of that will be taken from you. Upon reading this message from me, you should start hearing odd noises and feel a sense of fear and dysphoria wash over you. You will become anxious and frantic for no logical reason. Again, Jeff, my brain does that on its own, so you can't really take credit for that. The banging isn't the building you reside in, it's something else, something quite sinister. Something that wants your blood. If I don't get you, I will get those you love and care about. You, the one shivering in your chair and has a girlfriend named Jessica with whom you live with. She's mine. Jeff, that's another mistake because I'm currently wearing the world's sweatiest Halloween costume, so I'm definitely not shivering. You aren't safe. Heh. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. It's time for you to go to sleep, smiley face. I'll be in shortly. Sincerely, Jeffrey the Killer. Nice of him to use his full name there. P.S. Whomever is the one that's a junior at Kettle Moraine, you're cute. I'll take my time with you. I don't even know what to say. The entire reason I wanted to cover this story was because of this insane ending, but I'm honestly just speechless. It's kind of a double-edged sword that Jeff gets so specific at the end. I imagine if I had a girlfriend named Jessica, then I would be terrified right now. But I don't have a girlfriend named Jessica, which means that there is at least one person before me in the line of people who will be Jeff the Killed. And now that you guys have all read this story vicariously through this video, Jeff is probably on his way to kill you guys, so I probably have saved myself some time there. I don't know if he operates on like a first come, first served basis, or if he does the killing by like area code. Maybe he goes for like the larger population centers first. Either way, I will let you guys know if I am viciously Jeff the Killed in the comments down below. If you guys could do the same, that would be awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Sorry if this was a lot shorter than usual. The video before this one was over 4 hours long and took like a ton of time and effort to make. Speaking of that video, go watch it if you haven't yet. It's about a really interesting internet horror story called Tapers, written by the guy that made Petscop, if you know what that is. I would really appreciate you guys checking that one out if you haven't yet, because it did take me a really, really long time to make. Also, if you like what I do here, then please make sure to subscribe. I make videos on internet horror and horror literature, and I'm hoping to reach 200,000 subscribers by the end of next year, which is 2026. A massive thank you to all my gold tier channel members: Lucas Fernando, Chris Lamb, Tyler the Leper, Blue Radio Media, Miss Joy 16, Cherry Shark, Starlight Pink, Jackson Moore, Amanda Castillon, Arcade Link Author, The Official Gar, Sasso, Wybab Flow, Hi, Jenna Berry, Semra, Laura Gonza, Ben Best, Classic Pats Games Plus, Marin Elizabeth, and Exonym, Digital Fox, Sherbert, Emil Nomura, Temple, Jupiter Rainstorms, Maddie, Ellis Hale, Charity, Jess, Miley Bop, Abigail Wagner, Sunray Productions, Canadine, Utah, Emma Gee, Site 42, Maya S, Moss, Red, Ezra, FM, Alicia, Liminal Lake, Chipsa, Heater Brine, Yum the Epic, Spirit Hotline, Don't Play Brass Beast on Blue, Furbish GDC, Ketra Elizabeth, Mayfield, Shruby, Litcher Something, Hexmaniac Rafa, Jazzed, Homa Gaming, Sue, Junie, Danny, Stillcut Oaths, Veronica Heredia, Phantoms Forever, Ashley, Coco Boko, BB, Archie, Felly, Killer Ray 257, Jojo and Otter in a Trenchcoat, Icky Teal, JLKA, Thespian Rose, Safety Waffles, 731 Hamsters, Cork-Backed Ruler, Toby Dandelion, Red, Zapotapos, Tiny Moss Patch, Mary A, Charlie Smidge, Out of the Fandom, Creeping Freely for You Too, Meadow, Soundwayne, Silent Trails, Flatwoods Monster Webkins, Merle, Cedar, Salvador Rigodi, Florapaz, Patricia Zhang, Miguel, Jesse Salo, Alexandra Taylor, Finch, Oka, Violet, Hell of a Fan of Pugs, Poppy Stand Account, Geck, Lou, Racin, Dr. Doge, Meadow, Emily Huber, Shia Lancy, Cat Hughes, Rosie Vest, Leo, Marcus Cliver, Uneven Pineapple, Commissar Dorothy, Trista May, Jesse King, and Jin Sulia. Thank you all so much for your support. It really does mean a whole lot to me. I'll have more longer videos coming out soon. I just needed like a bit of a break after making 2 super long videos that I made this month. But like I said, your support really is very, very much appreciated. I've been having so much fun making videos lately. It's been a really good month for me, just like content-wise. And again, doing 2 like really ambitious long projects is a really fun thing to do, but very taxing. I should also say that if you like this style of video of like commenting and critiquing on a creepypasta, then Roughest Drafts is a channel that just recently made a video on The Rake. I talked about him earlier. His video is really great and goes more into like the mechanics of a story rather than like joking around, which is like most of it I did in this video. So please go check that out. It was a really great video. But thank you again to everyone for watching and for sticking to the end of this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya. Take me up again, let me see the stars. Is there life on Mars? 'Cause I've run out of luck here on Earth. I'm a wanderer. Another trip around the sun makes these memories flood, and I could wash it down with the atmosphere. You're cool blue and crystal clear. I'm an astronaut flying above, but can't fall in love. Floating alone, brave enough to see the cosmos, too scared to say hello. And I know one day I'll be gold,